Hey guys, welcome to Christ Culture and Coffee. Today, I'm your host, Robbie Lashwa, and I'm here with my co-host, Tyler Hurley. What's up, Tyler?
What is up, Robbie? We are super excited today because we have a very special guest on this week's show to talk about the pro-life movement.
Yeah,
right?
This is a big deal with this time where we're at with the election cycle and all the craziness that's going on. And as Christians, like, how do we decide, who we're going to vote for, what we're going to think? Mm-hmm. How do we live biblically in a really chaotic political situation?
Yeah, because it's about that time again. Another 4 years has passed, and there's another big election coming up. And there's always a candidate out there that you can vote for that makes the poor decision on pro-life movement, and that's something that we really have to take into consideration.
Yeah,
so we really want to talk about that a lot today. Yeah.
So our guest today is Seth Gruber. Seth is an awesome guy. I've been listening to his podcast for a while now. He travels and speaks at Protestant Catholic high schools all over the country. He does pro-life training, seminars, pregnancy resource center banquets. He does academic debates, blogs. He has his own podcast, which is called Unaborted, which you need to go and you need to subscribe to right now. It is just great. He's been featured in World Magazine, American Family Association, Christian Research Institute, Christianity Today, LifeSite News, Live Action News, Students for Life in America, and national radio broadcast. And he's a really nice guy on top of all of that. So Seth, we are stoked that you are here today to talk with us about the pro-life movement. How are you doing, man?
Doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, Christian apologetics meets pro-life apologetics, and we're gonna be just a super apologist today. So
that's right. That's super apologist. We should make T-shirts or something.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Or no, we're beyond that. We get tattoos now.
Yes,
that's what we do. Yeah. So anyway,
make it a little more permanent.
Yeah. Well, Seth, we're really glad to have you, man, and honestly, really appreciate what you do. We have worked with Alan Schleman from Standard Reason does pro-life stuff. Also out here, we're pretty involved with our Crisis Pregnancy Center in Phoenix, and we do the Walk for Life with them every year and advocate for them and help them train their people in certain things. Just love how God is really using the pro-life movement in America in this time. In the last 20 years, there's just been huge momentum swing, I think, with younger people in this movement. So again, before we get into all of that stuff, right off the bat, big question we need to ask right away is, do you like coffee?
Yeah, that is a big question. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
we got to start pumping our blood with caffeine before we get into this very light topic. Yeah, I do like coffee. I didn't grow up drinking coffee. I think my mom drank coffee growing up. My dad hated coffee, would never touch it. Hated anything that had a strong taste to it. Never drank alcohol. And then it wasn't until ironically, like all of us, college, where you're like, okay, I can't study.
Yeah,
I need to pump myself with caffeine. And then after college, I sort of like started, refining my taste in what I actually liked. So unfortunately, as popular as sort of the Chemex and the drip and the pour overs are, I can't handle it.
Okay, yeah, that's all right.
I can't handle it. I am so susceptible to substances, and so like if I have a pour over, I'm just wrecked. Like I start shaking.
Yeah.
I like look at my wife. I'm like, what's wrong? Like I feel like I'm not a Catholic, but I feel like I have to go to confession. Like, I feel like anxious, like I did something wrong.
Yeah.
My wife's like, no more pour overs for you. So I'll do like Americanos.
Okay.
Because it's like way watered down, so I can handle it.
Yeah.
I like Americanos. I'll wake up with my son. We'll go on a walk. We live right by the beach. I'll grab an Americano and just do that. And then if I'm meeting up with people, I get a little bit. I'm a little bit of a frou-frou, so I like my lattes.
That's all right. Hey, that's good.
So probably not as refined as you guys, but that's sort of my MO.
Listen, man, there's no shame in what you like. Everyone has different tastes and
as long as you just like it, that's what matters, right? That's the important thing.
Yeah, that's true. Unless you said Folgers, and then we'd make fun of you.
Yeah, we make fun of Folgers a lot on this show. That's kind of becoming a reoccurring theme here.
Yeah, I make fun of my in-laws when we go there for Christmas because they still have Folgers. I'm like, oh my gosh, isn't that like $1.50 Ralph's version?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Right. My grandpa, same thing. I'm like, man, grow up already, okay?
But
we're over this.
Love the smell of good coffee. So like in college at Westmont, my roommates or my flatmates, they would like grind it themselves, so I'd wake up to them grinding it, and they'd use the Chemex and they'd do the pour over, and I loved the smell.
Wow.
But if I drank it, then I was just destroyed for the next 3 hours.
Well, that's great. So far the consensus noticed with everyone we've had on enjoys the smell of coffee. Even the person who didn't drink coffee talked about a lot about the smell. So that's great. That's good.
I haven't met a person who doesn't like the smell of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's God's gift to mankind.
Guess so.
There it is. Anyway.
All right.
Well, good. We're glad you like coffee. We're glad you know your drinks.
Yes.
And you know your limits. That's another important thing. There was this one time, man, where I drank coffee like a lot, and in college it was bad. I was getting like black eye. Do you know like red eyes and black eyes are? It's like espresso in black coffee, so it's just caffeine on caffeine.
Yeah.
And I was drinking like 4 or 5 ventis a day. It was bad. And then I'd get headaches if I didn't have it. And I'm like, this is bad. I need to wean myself off the caffeine. So I did. But then I was weaning myself off, and then I ate a bunch of chocolate-covered espresso beans one day. And because I'd been weaning myself off, I couldn't handle the caffeine anymore. And my heart started pumping. And I was like, am I dying? Like, what's wrong with me? I don't even know what's going on. But knowing your limits, Seth, that's a big important thing in the Christian walk. So that's good. Anyway, well, good. Good coffee talk.
All right. Well, let's get into the topic for today. So if we could just start off, Seth, I just wanted to ask you, just to kick off the topic, why, as Christians, is the pro-life movement so vital for us to have a position on?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is the most sort of fundamental question, right? Because we can approach this from a purely human rights perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Of just why should humans care about abortion? But Christians do have the theological underpinnings that make the best sense of the world that we live in. Mm-hmm. You know, if the claims of Jesus are true, then everything he says about himself, everything he says about mankind is also objectively true. And so as proponents of reality, I guess, right, because scripture says Jesus is reality, we have the best sort of explanation from an ideological, theological, worldview explanation of why human beings are intrinsically valuable, why we have more valuable above other kinds of beasts or other forms of life. And of course, you know, you and your listeners would probably be able to answer this question just as well as I, which would be that we're created in the image of God, right? This idea of the imago Dei. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, the Bible has always forbidden the shedding of innocent blood. The Bible takes the shedding of innocent blood very seriously, right? The Proverbs says that God hates hands that shed innocent blood. And if you want to know how God feels about abortion, by the way, just read how God reacts to his people's complicity in child sacrifice.
Yeah.
He has some very colorful language for his people. He says things like, if one of these men sacrifices his child to Molech, I will cut him off from the people. He says, it never entered my mind that you would do this, meaning sacrificing your children to Molech. And he describes his people's complicity in child sacrifice as whoring after Molech. Well, I've always said that Satan doesn't care the name of the God that you sacrifice your children to. And as Christians, we understand that any other God, small g, besides Yahweh, is just a manifestation of Satan. It's Satan manifesting himself through spiritual powers in the forms of different idols to pull people away from Christ. So there are no other gods, right? There is but one God, and any other God is an idol that is really Satan. And so Satan doesn't care whether you sacrifice your child to actually a gold statue of Molech or whether it's the pagan gods of convenience, education, money, and career well-being. As long as you continue to shove children down his throat, he will be satisfied. Greg Cunningham, a longtime leader of the pro-life movement, once said that Satan would kill God if he could, but he can't. So he kills babies because he knows it wounds the heart of God and hurts the church.
Wow.
And so this is a spiritual battle far more than it is purely a political battle. It has political realities, but it is at root a spiritual battle. Why? Because these are image bearers of God who were knit together in their mother's wombs, fearfully and wonderfully made, such that the first person to recognize Christ was an unborn child. And if Roe versus Wade had been enforced in the first century, Jesus would have been likely aborted, apart from the sovereignty of Christ, of course, because Mary checked all of the Planned Parenthood prospect check boxes, unmarried, with a man threatening to leave her, a teenager without any financial stability.
Yeah.
And yet we have woke Christian progressives today telling us that we need to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because Trump is orange man bad.
Yeah.
Essentially saying that they will cast their vote for America's form of child sacrifice. So that's why Christians have to care about abortion, and why the only truly Christian position is a pro-life position.
Well, and see, and that's something that I've been hearing a lot of, not just this election cycle. But I'm old. I'm almost 37 years old. I'm old.
You look good.
Thanks. Hey, that's very nice. I put the on Skype. I put the blemish remover on, so I look nice through the lens.
Yeah.
But
I was gonna guess 31. So.
Yeah, well, that's good. But so I've seen you always, a lot of times it comes up where it's like, listen, man, this is just one issue, right? This isn't like the only thing to vote for. There's so much to humanity, and there's people that are poor, and there's people that need welfare, and there's all these other issues. And so yes, this is probably a little bad, the abortion thing, but in order to vote for these other issues, I'm okay with voting a pro-choice candidate in. So I guess my question for you is, should Christians be pro-choice? I think I asked you earlier, can they be pro-choice? But
Right.
the real question, of course you can. You can do anything, even sin, right? You can do bad things. But should a Christian be pro-choice?
Right. Great question, guys. You know what? I've been answering this question for a long time. I turned 29 this coming weekend on August 30th. And I've been answering this question since I was 18 when I did my senior project on abortion my senior year of high school. And that's really what sort of catapulted me into the pro-life movement. But I just recently decided to finally sit down and do an entire podcast episode on this question. So for your listeners, as Robbie already said, go subscribe to Unaborted with Seth Gruber. As you scroll down, it's just two or three or four down. It's called Can a Christian Be Pro-Choice? And I think destroying the theological case for abortion or something like that. So I answer that question, and then I also tackle the ridiculous ways that woke Christians try to actually utilize the Bible or the silence of the Bible to argue for either biblical apathy on abortion or a pro-choice position from Scripture. And we can get into that depending on kind of where this conversation takes us.
Sure.
But my answer to that question is this. A Christian can be pro-choice, but not permanently. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, neither can a bad tree bear good fruit. And when we come to Christ, particularly if we weren't raised in the church, we will have all sorts of ideas that need to be baptized. We might hold all sorts of opinions that will need to be abandoned. We might go to all types of places and associate with all types of people that will need to be abandoned, right? And as we begin to be sanctified, we begin to change how we think about the world. We put on gospel lenses. We adopt a Christian worldview. And then bad or sometimes evil ideas must be abandoned. I mean, this is we're just talking about sanctification.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And it is the role of the pulpit and of pastors and shepherds to help in that process. So can you be a Christian and truly be born again and hold a pro-choice position? Sure, but not permanently. That has to be abandoned. I think it would be strange for a Christian today to defend the premise that German Nazis were just filled with a bunch of born again believers.
Yeah.
We'd probably go, probably not, bro.
Yeah.
And so similarly on abortion, you can't continue in that way, just as we would say that with anything else, right? You can't continue to look at pornography and throw yourself into sexual immorality and continue to be a Christian. And Paul has a lot of powerful words, right? He has a lot to say about that sort of Christian justification, right? Shall we continue sinning so that grace may increase? Of course not. So that would be sort of my nuanced answer to that question, though I guess it's not that nuanced. It's pretty simple. But there can be no relationship between Christianity and the pro-abortion position.
Yeah, that's really good, man. I think to make that distinction of, because again, as Christians, we can do stupid things, right? And we're growing in Christ. And as we're seeking him and following after him and being disciples, we're going to be sanctified. But yeah, the idea that does the pro-choice movement fit with the Christian worldview? It does not. God is not happy with that. And it's not, it's so interesting to me how people act like, well, that's just an opinion. It's like, no, that's not really an opinion. Like, I mean, it's God's opinion, I guess you could say, but he's very clear
Very
about
clear,
certain
yeah.
issues. There's debate on eschatology and certain things like that, and it's like, okay, we do the best we can, and we got to land somewhere. But this one, man, I don't know how people
Yeah.
throw that into this category.
You can't. And then that's the thing, too. I'm thinking, like, it always stems back. Like, obviously, if you believe in the Bible is true as a Christian and you believe God's word and that human life is valuable, then if the unborn is a human being, then you should see it as valuable and you should defend it, right? Because as a Christian, that's what we should be doing in alignment with Scripture. So it's just thinking that through in that process, it doesn't really... That's where I guess you start to get into some of the arguments and stuff, but it's very interesting. It's like thinking... how can you rationalize as a believer the killing of a human life in the unborn? And so that's where it's really, I think it gets a little interesting, is that people who try to defend it from a biblical basis, they just have this fog over their eyes, in my opinion.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Tyler. And you just exactly nailed it, right? Is that the fundamental question in the abortion debate is who counts as one of us? That's ultimately what we're asking, right?
Yep.
Who is part of the human race? And are all humans equal in value? And where does this value come from? Does our value as human beings, and therefore our right to life, stem from certain functions and capacities? Does it come from certain accidental properties that vary across person to person? Or is it grounded in a human nature? The pro-life answer to that question is it's grounded in a human nature.
Yep.
As soon as we accept the premise that human value and therefore right to life is dependent on your capacities or functions, then we now enter a world of Darwinianism in which the strong can kill the weak, in which might makes right.
Yep.
Because we do not have anything in common at a fundamental level as human beings except a human nature, right? And our properties and capacities and functions are going to come in varying degrees, right? So pro-choicers will say something like, well, it's okay to kill the unborn child through an abortion because the unborn child cannot feel pain. And so they're not fully viable, right? So I say something like this, well, have you heard of a disease called congenital analgesia? And they go, what's that? And I say, well, it's actually a disorder in which born people cannot feel any pain. So you could slit open their wrist and they would start bleeding out and look at you, and they might as well just tell you a joke. They wouldn't feel anything. Can I kill them? And they go, no. And I go, okay, well, I guess then human rights and right to life can't be grounded in the ability to feel pain, right?
Yeah.
And I could do this, guys, for the next 30 minutes with you. I could just start taking every pro-choice argument, and I would expose the bigotry in that argument by pointing to the fact that the same type of functions or capacities you argued were necessary for the unborn to have a right to life can also be found amongst born people who don't have the same possession of those capacities or to the same degree that you say the unborn must have to have a right to life.
So then it gets down
so
to
that's ultimately the question is who counts as one of us, and where does this value come from?
Exactly. And then if they say, okay, well, it's not about, certain characteristics or traits or abilities we have, then is it literally about location? Like you're in the womb and then you're out? So location makes you a human being or not? That's nonsense.
Does the birth canal magically confer personhood?
No.
Is there some type of uterine fairy that sprinkles personhood conferring fairy dust on the child through the 6-inch journey? It's just silliness, right? Where one is, as Frank Beckwith says, has no bearing on who one is. So we could crush these pro-choice arguments for days, but ultimately, what the pro-abortion advocate is assuming is one of two things: either the unborn is not human, or they are a human, but they're not a person. Now the burden of proof is on them to explain what's the difference between a human and a person, and what capacities are necessary for one to be a person. And whatever capacities or functions that they point to say for the litmus test of personhood, I can show them a born person who would fail to meet the litmus test of personhood you just presented for the unborn child. So at the end of the day, the pro-abortion position, guys, destroys human equality because it grounds human rights in functions and capacities that we don't have in common. It's only by grounding human value and a right to life in our human nature, which is the only thing we have in common, that we can maintain human equality.
Yeah. No, dude, that's a great way to say it. And that's the absolute truth. And it's fascinating right now because we're seeing, a culture war over that skin color doesn't make somebody better or worse, right? That's kind of the idea. However, it's the same group who is demeaning another portion of society and saying, well, if you're an unborn, that does discriminate you.
That's right. Yeah. Our culture is sort of primed for this conversation right now.
Oh, yeah.
Because let's just assume, okay? Let's assume the premises of the Black Lives Matter proponents, okay? There's systemic racism in our country. And the 1619 Project from the New York Times, that's our true founding, because that's when the first slaves hit the American shore. So therefore, that represents who we are far more than 1776, when we articulated the ideas of natural rights into law. And while we fail to live up to those values, and while we fail to adequately apply those natural rights to all Americans, the story of America is a upward struggle in equity, in fairness, in attributing those natural rights to all Americans.
Yes.
No, that's not America, according to Black Lives Matter. We're systemically racist, root and branch from our inception, and our institutions are infected with systemic racism, which is ironic because the left controls all the institutions. So it begs the question, why didn't you root out the systemic racism? But let's just assume that those claims are true, okay?
Yeah.
What they're getting at is a fundamental pro-life position. It's a fundamental pro-life ideology, which is that our value is not based on accidental properties like skin color. That's why we would be in agreement with the phrase Black Lives Matter, even though we wouldn't support the Marxist organization that wants to tear down the family and kill black babies, because we agree with the phrase. And the reason is because it's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, white nor black. Our value is based on our humanity that comes from being image bearers of God.
Yes.
But those same people, as Robbie just accurately observed, that decry racism because it mistreats innocent human beings based off of capacities that they have no control over, i.e. skin color, will then turn around and support one of the most pro-abortion organizations in the country, Black Lives Matter, Planned Parenthood, and they discriminate against unborn human beings based on capacities they have no control over, namely being smaller and more developed and less developed.
And that's what's crazy, because it's like, if you think about it, it's a people group who in the past had been dehumanized, who now is fighting against that while dehumanizing an entire new population of the people group.
Robbie, one of my greatest frustrations in the last 6 months has been the majority of Black America's willingness to support the Democratic Party and to support the pro-abortion position. And I sit there and I figuratively bang my head against the table and say, why, God, why? Same people whose ancestors were denied full rights of personhood because of something they couldn't control about themselves are supporting the same political bleeping party that enslaved their ancestors and now promotes a modern form of that ideological bigotry in denying the unborn human being full rights of personhood because of capacities they have no control over.
Well, I think something that we don't talk enough about in culture either is that, like, the Americanized legal abortion was created out of racism. Like, they specifically placed Planned Parenthoods and legal abortion clinics in Black neighborhoods to reduce the Black population, because it was created out of a racist act. And so you're seeing, it's incredible. It's like this was like legalized abortion was meant to reduce the Black population. And there's so many quotes and evidences that this is what they're
Tyler,
targeting.
are you saying that cancel culture is really selective in who they call to cancel?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating. because like again, and there's so much debate on this, and I don't know where you land on it, but does systemic racism still exist? There's definitely echoes of it, and we're dealing with problems that it had created. Does it exist now? Doesn't it? I think you have to say systemic racism exists in Planned Parenthood abortion clinics.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's
In my
really like the
opinion,
only clear
systemic
one I see.
racism
Yeah.
exists in two places: affirmative action that's racist against Asians and whites, and the abortion industry. According to a study by Protecting Black Life, they found that 79%, so let's call it 80% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are located in minority neighborhoods and black neighborhoods within walking distance of that surgical abortion facility. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a racist and eugenicist who spoke at a KKK rally. Who provided the inspiration for Hitler's eugenics policies. She hobnobbed with American eugenicists who helped launch the American eugenics movement, while Hitler was sitting in a jail after a failed coup attempt in Munich, poring over the writings of the founders of the American Eugenics Society and writing them freaking fan mail.
That's crazy.
Saying that their book was, quote, his Bible. Margaret Sanger hobnobbed with these American eugenicists and also helped write some of the inspirational policy for Hitler's eugenics policy in Germany. And Margaret Sanger launched the Negro Project with the express intent of decreasing the amount of black people, right? And she wrote to a pastor by the name of Dr. Clarence Gamble, amongst others, because her goal, guys, was actually to get black pastors on board with her Negro Project, which was to infect urban minority communities with birth control and sell it as an empowering tool, with the ultimate goal of creating less black people. And she said to a letter to Dr. Clarence Gamble, "We do not want word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." And we have a statue of Margaret Sanger outside of one of the massive Planned Parenthood facilities. And Planned Parenthood continues to give the Margaret Sanger Award, I believe, on an annual basis. And guess one of the recipients of the Margaret Sanger Award was? Pause. Hillary Clinton, who said that she was proud to receive and be recognized alongside women like Margaret Sanger. So as it turns out, cancel culture is very selective in who they call to cancel. And they care that the movement that they support, which results in the slaughter of 1 million image bearers every year, has its inception in the American eugenics movement and racism, and even with the KKK.
That is disgusting.
Well,
and it's amazing people don't know about it.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to just clarify, because I think this is important before we move on to the next question, is when we talk about the image of God in us, right? And again, theologians debate over what exactly is that. What is, you said human nature. If our dignity and value isn't rooted in our human nature, then none of us have anything else in common, right? Or all of us don't have something else in common. So when you say human nature, what would be kind of like a street term or a normal way to say this is what I mean by human nature?
Human beings.
Yeah.
I don't get into too much into the weeds with it. I don't complicate it too much because here's why. I believe that eternity is written on the heart of man. I believe that, as Romans said, man is without excuse. God has made his divinely, his invisible attributes, visible to all, right? You look up at the stars, you sin, you feel guilt, right? And I think that reality tends to be self-evident. And I think that reality in this case is that regardless of political partisanship, regardless of religious opinions, human beings fundamentally believe that human beings are more valuable than any other form of life. Now, will they all say that? No, they won't. But if you push them on that, they will, right? So they'll say, no, we're just another form of life floating around through the world, right? That they'll say things like, that animal rights are just as important as human rights, because ultimately we're all just floating atoms crashing around in the universe, and there's no creator, so therefore no one is intrinsically valuable, right? And then of course I always ask, and why are you so passionate about animal rights? Why does it matter?
Exactly.
Right? But then you can ask them, I'll ask them something like this. I'll say, are you really telling me that there's no difference between eating a hamburger and a Harold burger?
Yeah.
Are you really telling me that there's no difference between you stopping by the In-N-Out drive-thru on your way home and you stopping by to eat your child on the way home? You're saying those are fundamentally morally equivalent. No, of course not. That's disgusting, Seth. How could you say that? Okay, well, you just proved yourself wrong.
Yeah.
You just proved that you actually believe human beings are intrinsically valuable because of a human nature. And it's that human nature that makes us different than any other form of life. And of course, we could get into the philosophical weeds if we want, right?
Well,
a rational nature, that all things being equal will be realized given time. And we could get into more of that. But ultimately, pro-lifers just make a very simple argument that we have value and we have equality because of a human nature. And most people at a fundamental sort of moral reflex level, they just get that. And that I think that's evidence of God, right? The rain falls on the just and the unjust. Yep. Eternity is written on the heart of man. So I like to start with those self-evident premises that our founders crafted into our founding document.
See, and that's what I agree with. And that's where, I didn't want people to overthink it. Like, when you say, Imago Dei, and, okay, so how am I an image bearer? I sometimes think it's a category error, because it's not what you do, it's what you are. You are a human being, therefore you're valuable, right? It's not something I achieve, it's what I am. And that's, I think, the fundamental crux of it.
And pro-life philosophers, they'll go deeper, right?
Sure.
People have done great work on this. Frank Beckwith, Patrick Lee, of course, my mentor, Scott Klusendorf, Greg Kokel, many others, Christopher Kazor, and they'll I think therefore I am, right? That we have a fundamentally rational nature. But then someone might say, well, what about someone who is brain dead, right? So what about someone who is severely mentally handicapped and is not able to practice sort of cognitive mental capacities in the same way that you and I can, And then the pro-life philosopher responds, well, no, the fundamental question is, all things being equal.
Yeah.
That capacities run central to who we are, So they'll say, is a dog not a dog just because they can't bark?
Yeah.
If they lose the ability to bark. Well, no, it's still a dog. So the mentally handicapped individual who can't achieve the same level of mental excellence as you and I, all things being equal, they still would. That doesn't mean they're not a human being. Yes. And we can get into those conversations. Sometimes we have to with pro-abortion philosophers that are going to offer, more carefully crafted arguments. Yeah. But for the pro-choice run of the mill, right? Individual on the street level, a simple argument from human nature should suffice.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's because they're a human, right? Like the unborn's not a human. Well, what is it? A dolphin? Is it a chameleon? Like, what's in there, man? Like, it's crazy. I have 4 kids, and every time they've come out, and they're human beings. It's insane. I got lucky, right? No, that's how it is, because humans beget humans. That's what they are. And before they ever achieved anything or learned language, they are a human being. They have a human nature. And so I think that's really important for us to just be able to anchor it in that. And you're right, we do need to get into the philosophical things with arguing with certain people. But on the street, people get that idea. But I just don't want people to get confused on, well, what do you mean by human nature, and when do we get it?
That's important.
We get it at conception, because it's what we are. Yeah,
that's right. But I do want your listeners to be aware of the moves that will be made by the pro-choice people in their lives. So your friends, family members, or coworkers who might disagree with you, what are they going to say? What's going to be their next move when you graciously engage on topics of abortion? And you say, I believe abortion is wrong because I believe it's always wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. That's what abortion does. And so therefore I believe abortion is wrong. The pro-choice person at this point, for your listeners, will say something like this. Either they'll say, well, it is cellularly human, so it has human DNA, but it's not a human being. And we can correct that by pointing to the science of embryology, which has clearly communicated for decades that from the moment of conception, the unborn child is a whole human being. So they're not like a skin cell that just has human DNA. That's confusing parts with wholes, right? When I scratch off my skin cells on my arm, those somatic cells that come off are not human beings, are they?
No.
But they are cellularly human. They have human
Sure.
DNA. But they're not a human. They're part of the whole. I'm the whole entity, okay? So your listeners need to understand that many pro-choicers will take the anti-science route by saying, okay, the unborn has human DNA from the moment of conception, but it's not really a human. No, from the moment of conception, that's a whole human being. What does that mean? It means that from the moment of conception, the unborn child already has everything they need to realize their full growth and development as a participating member of the human species.
Yeah.
Just like me at 28 years old has everything I need to realize my full growth and development as a 40-year-old.
Yeah.
Am I 40 yet? No. In fact, I recently found out, actually my wife recently found out that men don't reach their mental peak until their 40s.
Really?
And she was very encouraged by that. She was really hoping.
She's like, there's hope. All right,
and I said, thanks, babe. So there are degrees of development that I have not realized yet. Does that mean that I am not a whole human being now?
No.
Of
Or
course
that,
not.
or that you weren't when you were 5 years old, or that you weren't when you were an infant.
We could do the toddler to the teenager to the adult.
Sure.
We could ask that question about any human being at any tick mark along the continuum of human development. So similar, the unborn child has everything they need to realize their full growth and development. Okay, that's how you debunk the first move of the pro-abort, who says, okay, it is a human in the sense that it's cellularly human, but it's not like a whole human being. No, it is a whole human being. Then they'll say, and this is really where the abortion debate happens, is right here. They'll say this: it's not a person. And this is the type of historical bigotry that the advocates of genocide have always resorted to, is separating the term human from person. And my university speaking tour last year, which was supposed to wrap up at UC Berkeley and my alma mater, Westmont College, unfortunately both got canceled in March because of COVID. And those were going to be two really fun events because Berkeley's crazy. And Westmont's been infected by leftism, theological liberalism. In fact, Westmont College hires pro-abortion professors.
Really?
And I know that because I had email correspondences with them, and we can get more into that on another episode maybe. But so the idea that I was articulating in that speaking tour was that the proponents of genocide have always separated the term human from person in order to dehumanize a subset of human beings that they had a vested interest in exterminating. This is what the Nazis did to the Jews. This is what the racists did to African Americans. And this is what pro-aborts do to unborn children. In each case, in each historical case, you guys, the proponents, the defenders of genocide, did not deny the biologically human nature of their victims. They weren't going around saying that Jews are not biologically human if you look at their DNA. They were saying they weren't persons. And that's the same thing that the pro-abortion movement does to unborn children. That's the second move that the pro-abortion movement makes, is to argue against the personhood of the unborn and argue that only persons have rights.
So would you say that the move is to basically say, I'm God and I'm not deeming value and worth on you? That's what they're doing, right? A person is I value you.
All the time. At the end of the day, abortion is a way for individuals to deify themselves and determine who gets to live and who gets to die.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's fascinating. And then you dehumanize. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. They're dehumanizing them. Do you think it's ironic that in a primarily naturalistic, scientific society, people run to a metaphysical argument to make their case? Like I know biologically it's a human being, but it doesn't have this magic sauce called personhood. Well, what is that? Like on your worldview, what does that even mean? I didn't think there was a ghost in the machine. I didn't think.
You deny the existence of an objective reality. So how then are you going to metaphysics and asserting your form of objectivism to defend the pro-choice position? Right? It's very funny that the pro-choice movement, by and large, is packed with secular humanists and atheists who don't hold to an objectively true universe, right? They're not objectivists. They don't believe in objective truth, but they're sure convinced that pro-lifers are objectively wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, very true.
Yeah, so I wanted to actually like redirect the conversation a little bit again back to Biden and Harris, because you were mentioning about them as like political candidates that are probably like the most pro-choice option that we've had for a presidential office in history. And do you kind of want to elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
The Biden-Harris administration will be the most pro-abortion one in American history. They currently are the most pro-abortion political ticket in American history. And here's what I have to say about that briefly, and then I'll elaborate. It is a moral wrong. Okay, that's the language I'm going to use. It is a moral wrong for Christians to vote for a party that in their platform has promised to protect, expand, and fund the slaughter of innocent human beings.
Yeah.
Oh, but they're unborn. Yeah, where one is has no bearing on who one are.
Yeah.
Oh, but they're not persons. Yeah, well, your same party used to say that about blacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they can't feel pain. Yeah, some born people can't either. I mean, we could go down and down this road of bigoted arguments. At the end of the day, it's just a rehashing of bigotry towards the unborn child.
Yeah.
They do represent the most dangerous political administration for the unborn in American political history. And we've had some very pro-abortion candidates.
Oh, sure.
Obama is currently the most pro-abortion president in American history. Hillary would have been far more pro-abortion than Obama. And it was a gracious move of God to help America avoid her. Now, God is sovereign. He can do whatever he wants, right?
Sure.
But ultimately our hope is not in politics. But that was a good thing for America. That was a good thing for freedom. And that was a good thing for unborn children that Hillary did not become president. Biden and Harris represent an extremely more dangerous political ticket than Kaine, right? Than Tim Kaine and Hillary Clinton posed. I have an episode, maybe 52, and I'm on 62 right now. So only a few episodes back on my podcast guide called Joe Biden, Abortion Crazy Kook. And then I have this last Monday's episode called Kamala Harris Hates Babies. If you listen to those two, you will get a very good in-depth overview of Biden and Harris's entire political history on abortion and the danger that they would pose in the Oval Office.
Right.
Kamala Harris was Attorney General in California not that long ago, right before she became senator.
Yeah.
And she was the one who prosecuted David Daleiden and the Center for Medical Progress in 2015 for releasing their undercover investigative journalist videos with high-ranking Planned Parenthood officials, not random staff members, right? High-ranking members of clinics or of Planned Parenthood corporate over lunch meetings, haggling over the price of dead baby body limbs that they were trying to sell to interested third parties for more profit. That is illegal. The trafficking of body parts is illegal, be they fetal or born body parts. And it's illegal because it creates an incentive to get more of those body parts. And the only way to get those body parts is to kill more babies through abortion. And David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt of the Center for Medical Progress were the first undercover journalists to ever be prosecuted by the Attorney General of California for recording conversations in public areas, right, where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. So as David Daleiden rightly points out, Kamala Harris was prostituting her attorney general duties, her prosecutorial duties to her political campaign donors, the abortion industry, who max out to her reelection campaigns every year.
Yeah, that's right.
Rather than targeting Planned Parenthood for their illegal involvement in trafficking baby body parts that they had already aborted to make extra cash on.
Yeah.
And they still have not been fully prosecuted. And Kamala Harris raided David Daleiden's apartment and prosecuted him for misusing California law and recording conversations without permission, which you actually can be prosecuted for if you do it like in someone's living room where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, but not at a restaurant.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was a public place, wasn't it?
Yeah, restaurants. This woman was behind the Women's Health Protection Act that she co-sponsored last year, which represented the most radical piece of federal pro-abortion legislation in American history. Guys, this piece of legislation would have basically ruined all of the state laws against discriminatory abortions, which say some states have laws that say you can't kill babies if you're doing it because you don't want a boy, for example, right? Or based off of race or something like that, or based off of eugenics. I also have a podcast episode called Abortion is Modern Day Eugenics from just a few weeks ago for your listeners. Many parents will get abortions after they learn that their baby has Down syndrome or trisomy 18, right? Or they're disabled. So some states have laws against discriminatory abortions. The Women's Health Protection Act, co-sponsored by Kamala Harris, would have done away with all those laws. It would have done away with parental notification laws, which just say if you're a minor who wants to kill your child, maybe you should have your parents involved. It would have done away with the pain-capable unborn child protections in certain states at 20 weeks plus, where it is undisputed that the unborn child can feel the full range of human pain just like any born person. It would have done away with that. It would have prevented any state legislation on preventing third trimester abortions. It would have forced Americans to fund abortion even more. This is radical
crazy.
Legislation.
Yeah, that's insane.
And to just continue with Kamala, give you a brief flyover on Kamala Harris. She has said, since she started running for president last year before her campaign erupted in a flaming garbage pile of fire, she said that she was going to institute pre-clearance guidelines for states who wanted to pass pro-life legislation, basically obliterating federalism and the democratic will to institute her botched political ideology. What that means is that if a more red state wanted to pass pro-life laws, before the legislation is even voted on, guys, Kamala Harris would have to give it pre-clearance.
Oh, wow.
That is so anti-unconstitutional and anti.
That's crazy.
She has said that she is open to the conversation about adding 4 more justices to the Supreme Court. By the way, anytime a radical pro-abortion Democrat tells you they're open to having a conversation about something, it usually means we need to do it right now. It's their way to try to be perceived as a moderate. So she has said she'd be willing to add 4 Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court. What is she telling us, guys? She's telling us that under her administration, she would pack the court with 4 leftists in one term.
She's going to change it. She's going to pick who's in.
Or Ruth Bader Ginsburg for a second.
Ugh.
That would set the pro-life movement back decades and obliterate the option and ability of ending abortion in our lifetime. And lastly, she said that she would be open to talking about getting rid of the filibuster. So basically, you want to filibuster the attempt of the Biden-Harris administration, who might have the House and the Senate, to expand the size of the Supreme Court? Sorry, you can't filibuster it. We got rid of it. She said she'd be willing to do that as well. So what does all that mean? It means that she will weaponize all of that political power against unborn children. So I released a graphic today on my social media saying essentially that Kamala Harris is to babies what Hitler was to the Jews, and unborn children will be targeted for dismemberment like any other time in American history under a Biden-Harris administration. And that's just Kamala Harris, guys. I haven't even gotten to Joe Biden. So they represent the most dangerous political ticket for the unborn.
Wow. And that's where you see this, because again, it's if you're just looking at it from a political standpoint, you go, why do you have to be pro-choice to be in the Democratic Party? Because you have to be. You will go nowhere if you're not.
Bernie Sanders said that to be part of our party, you have to be pro-abortion.
You have to be. And so with that, and it's always masked as women's health, which it's not. It's devastating to women's health.
Reproductive health care.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Not on board reproductive health care, Robbie.
No, I'm not.
Some kind of bigot.
Yeah, I'm bigoted towards killing innocent lives. Yes, but that's where it gets back to. This is a spiritual war. Because why? I mean, from a human standpoint, you go, why be so rabid about something like that? It's insane. You can't really believe you're helping that many. You're not helping people. And that's the case. It's not a political thing. It's a spiritual battle. Satan's waging war against the image bearers of God, which he's been doing in different venues and in different ways since the beginning. He wants to annihilate
It's not about
us.
reproductive health care. And the political operatives who use that type of euphemistic linguistics, that type of euphemistic gymnastics to communicate that. The reason, guys, why they have to work so hard to reinvent the English language to describe the limb tearing of children as reproductive health care is because reality has an annoying tendency of reasserting itself in our lives, right?
Yep.
The great conservative consolation is that reality reasserts itself in the end. It did with slavery, it did with the Holocaust. Reality has a tendency of crawling back up out of the grave that you dug it into and slapping you in the face, right? That reality has a tendency of doing that. And that is why political operatives have to resort to doublespeak, right? Doublespeak is the idea of, saying the lie about the truth, saying that the good is the bad, the evil is the good, right? The lies are the truth. This is very Orwellian. And the reason why people have to do that is because at a fundamental level, guys, and this is very important, I believe at a fundamental level, the partisans of abortion know fully well that these are little human babies. And I can give so many examples of that. For example, June Medical versus Rousseau, the big abortion decision that was at the Supreme Court just in June or something, June or July. And it was out of a Louisiana law that simply required this. You ready? You ready for how radically pro-life bigoted this is? It simply said, abortionists ought to have admitting privileges at a local hospital, just like every ambulatory surgical center. Well, I mean, literally every surgeon or ambulatory surgical center has to have admitting privileges at a local hospital to expedite the process of checking in a new patient if for emergency reasons, for emergency care. And frequently there are botched abortions. Women's, uterine wall can be torn through. They can start bleeding internally. And abortion clinics, believe it or not, shocker, are usually not equipped to care for the health of women because they don't really care about the health of women. So all this law said was, hey, we just need to treat abortionists and the abortion industry and hold them to the same high level of medical care and standards as all other forms of surgeries. I mean, how non-controversial is that, right? So what this law did was it forced the partisans of abortion to either affirm that they care about women's health above everything else, or expose their real faces, take the mask off, and show us that you're partisans hacks who hate unborn children, and you're willing to sacrifice the life and health of the very women that you claim to wake up to serve in order to maintain abortion access. That's what that decision revealed to us, folks. And you guys can go back on my podcast. I have a whole episode about that as well. And the reason why it revealed that was because we have plenty of cases in which women have died because they didn't have the best care available to them at the abortion clinic. So why is it controversial, pro-choicer, to ask the abortion industry to have the same standards as every other surgeon to ensure best care for the women? Here's the answer. They knew that very few abortion clinics or abortionists could meet those standards. And we know that because there was a Texas decision just like it several years ago that was struck down by the Supreme Court. And I can't remember who wrote the majority opinion, but the point he made in it, he was one of the liberal justices. One of the points he made in it was that about 50% of Texas's abortion clinics would have disappeared had that law been upheld because so many of those clinics wouldn't have been able to meet those standards. So what is the abortion industry telling us? That's a little vignette that communicates this truth. The abortion industry doesn't give two flipping bleeps about the health of the women that they claim to serve because they're quite willing to boycott policies that would ensure the highest level of protection for those women's health in order to ensure that no access to abortion is limited whatsoever, which means that it's really about cash. It's really about making money on the slaughter of preborn children. So now this gets to a much more debased and disgusting type of discussion because they're not just people who have self-deluded themselves into believing that it's truly just reproductive health care. That's just a phrase that functions as a political cudgel to bash pro-lifers as not caring about health care when they're the ones who are endangering the health care of women in order to expand abortion. So these are people who are serving Satan, who is the first and original and most passionate murderer of babies. He is the dragon in Revelation waiting for Mary to give birth to eat her child. He is behind Pharaoh's command to kill all of the babies. He is behind Herod's command to kill all of the babies. Satan loves killing babies, and he does it because he knows it wounds the heart of God and fragments the church and creates broken people.
So as Christians, what do we do about this? Obviously, you can't vote pro-choice. Like And I don't know every single person who listens to our show, but like, you just can't. Like, that's
right.
if you want to live a consistent Christian life, you have to be pro-life and vote pro-life.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's something. Obviously prayer is huge. Obviously talking to your friends, listening to your show, Seth, getting equipped on how do I change people's minds about this. But what are some other things that we can do as believers to wage this spiritual battle?
That's a really good question. Yeah, what can we do? Yeah, let's definitely wrap up with that. Firstly, I would add one comment to what you just said about how we have to vote pro-life. I absolutely agree. However, here's an interesting sort of caveat to that conversation that most pro-lifers are not aware of, and it's something that most pro-lifers may not be equipped to think through well, unless they hear it from a more seasoned pro-lifer. And I'm not talking myself up necessarily, but I've been in the movement for a long time.
Yeah.
In a situation where you have a pro-abortion Republican, okay, running for, let's say, the House of Representatives, right, running for a congressional seat, and you have a pro-life Democrat.
Is there such a thing?
Oh, this has happened all the time.
Okay.
Oh, yes, there are some.
Okay.
There are pro-life Democrats. Yes. They're a rare breed today, right?
Yeah.
But they're not extinct yet.
Okay.
There is a group called Democrats for Life of America. I have a couple bones to pick with them. They're proponents of this sort of whole life ethic, consistent life ethic, which says you're not really pro-life unless you support universal basic income and open borders and universal health care.
Sure.
And because you have to be pro all lives, so they conflate protection of life in the womb with quality of life outside the womb.
Okay.
And that's a moral outrage. Those are not the same.
Yeah.
But there's this idea that you're not really pro-life unless you adopt all of these other, sort of positions. So I don't like that about them, but they pressure their Democrat Party to make room for pro-lifers and to change their abortion extremism, right?
Okay.
And there are some legislators. There might even be one senator, though I could be wrong. There might be one senator, but I believe there's none. There's not a single pro-life Democrat senator except maybe one. But there's some representatives that are.
Okay.
But they're part of a party whose platform is so pro-abortion that a pro-life Democrat has no hope of accomplishing anything for the pro-life movement. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's important. So the only thing I'd add to what you said is that for pro-lifers who understand the legislative battlefield, the political battlefield, I would say you can never vote for a party whose platform is to promote, expand, and fund abortion. Not necessarily never for never for a pro-choice person.
Okay.
Because in that circumstance, we as pro-life individuals actually have to vote for the pro-choice Republican. And I know that sounds weird, but listen to me. That ensures that the Democrat Party doesn't get another congressional seat. Because sometimes these votes come down very close. They come right down to the wire.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you give another vote into the Democrat Party, oftentimes, even if he's pro-life, he'll cave out of pressure, right? And there's a whole bunch of other sort of political aspects that go into that. Oftentimes, when they vote for the Speaker of the House, right, who really sets the legislative agenda, oftentimes pro-life Democrats have been known to vote for very pro-abortion speakers of House. Because their whole party's doing it, so they cave. You see all the sort of ins and outs of it.
Yeah,
but
that's important.
you would say, oh no, pro-life, you got to vote for the pro-life Democrat. No, not necessarily. Not if you want to ensure that eventually we have federal protections for unborn children.
So you would say vote Republican.
Always.
Yeah. See, and you're from California, so this is kind of crazy from my perspective. It's like a Californian saying that.
Yeah,
but
you have to. You have to. And people go, oh, Seth, you're such a single issue voter. Excuse me, would you be a single issue voter on slavery?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
well, Seth, yeah, that's not the same. How is it not the same? If you believe that human beings are intrinsically valuable and that human life begins at the moment of conception, then human rights and a right to life have to be granted to all humans, whether they're in the womb or outside the womb, whether they're dependent or not dependent, whether they're small or big. And so if you believe abortion is as equally morally evil as slavery, if not more, then you need to adopt the same types of legislative strategies to protect their life as you would for slavery.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the people who say they're not single issue voters on abortion, they say they're pro-life, but they don't vote. They don't vote single ticket. They're not a single issue voter. Would suddenly magically become single issue voters if the issue is slavery, which raises the question, as Hadley Arkes, the great natural rights philosopher, says, leaves me to wonder whether these friends are really possessed of a lively sense that real human beings are getting killed in these surgeries. Because if they were possessed of that sense, they would be just as politically committed to protecting the unborn as they would have been as abolitionists in 1850.
That's right.
So anyways, those are little political intricacies maybe for your listeners. But what can we do as Christians? Well, one, you can have no part to do with evil. You can have nothing to do with the evil of the abortion industry, which means don't kill your children. Now, I know that sounds like a duh, but many Christians have been known to obtain abortions because they want to avoid shame. And guess what? They're not the first ones to do that, right? This has been done before. King David, right, arranges the death of an innocent human being out of shame of his sexual malfeasance, of his sexual immorality, right? He arranges to have Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, murdered so no one finds out that he slept with Bathsheba. How many Christian women or men go get abortions because they don't want someone to find out about their sexual immorality, right? So, hey, King David did it. If there was grace for him, there's grace for you, right? The gospel is available to all, but we can have nothing to do with the killing of children. And unfortunately, the Guttmacher Institute, Planned Parenthood Statistical Research Branch, reports that over 30% of the annual abortion rate are being performed on women who identify as evangelical Protestants. So this is happening within the walls of the church.
That's terrible.
Now, that leads me to my second point, which is this. How can we expect obedience to protecting life from the Church of Christ if we can't prevent the slaughter of children within our own walls? How can we expect American pastors to truly be pro-life, to do something about their pro-life position, if they're, I think one could argue from a spiritual, theological perspective, are complicit in the death of children within their congregation? Because, as my friend Victoria Robinson from Save the Stork says, their silence is really, really loud. Their silence is really loud. And what it does, friends, is it gives tacit permission to the young women in their church who suddenly find themselves facing an unplanned pregnancy, and they think, I don't want my pastor or family to find out, but they were never given a truly spiritual, theologically rich perspective on abortion. Their youth pastor, their pastor never talked about it from the pulpit. So what is the unspoken assumption in the mind of that young man or woman in America's churches? It must not be that big of a deal, right? That becomes the unspoken assumption. So the silence of our pulpits is deafening, friends.
Well, and there's an opposite side is, well, and again, because I believe the Bible is true, and sexual immorality is a bad deal, but maybe we make too much out of sexual immorality, and so the shame and guilt from that issue, which is wrong, overshadows, but killing an innocent human being isn't as bad as being ashamed of having premarital sex, which is a crazy thing. But I think that's what's been happening for the past 30, 40 years in American churches is this is the cardinal sin. Don't cross that line. But we're not even going to mention this. And you bet the world is there to tell you what to do when you find yourself in a crisis pregnancy situation.
That's right.
And if we don't talk about it, the world's going to tell people what to do, especially our young people.
That's exactly right, Robbie. This is very important for your listeners to understand. Okay, I speak in Protestant Catholic high schools and youth groups and youth conferences all around the country. And I ask the administrators of these schools all the time that I have to work my butt off to get into in the first place. Most of them have never had a pro-life speaker before. And I tell them rather, the issue is not whether your students are getting formed on how to think about abortion. The question is by whom? And do you want to play a role in the discipleship and formulation of how your young people are going to think about abortion? Because they're all absorbed in social media. They're getting formed on how to think about abortion by someone and in a certain way. Who is going to be the dominant voice in how they interact with the issue of abortion? And sadly, that voice has often not been the church, right? Francis Schaeffer once said that every abortion clinic ought to have a sign out front that says open with the permission of the Church of Jesus Christ. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. God will not hold us guiltless. What does that mean? It means that there is no such thing as moral neutrality on the killing of children. You can't take the middle road. If you stand in the middle of the road, you're going to get run over by a truck. It's time for us to pick sides. It's time for Christians to abandon their, I will argue, sinful obsession with ensuring that they're not perceived as partisan.
Yeah.
It's time for Christians to abandon their sinful obsession with their reputation and engage in the political battles necessary to protect unborn children. Oh, but Seth, the Republicans aren't perfect. Oh, but Seth, President Trump tweets nasty things.
Sure.
Oh, but Seth, the Republicans are not as they're not as friendly to open immigration as the Democrats. Oh, but Seth, Republicans don't support universal health care. And if all lives are important, then poor lives are important too that need health care. Oh, but this, oh, but that. All of these concerns, friends, that they would never raise if instead of the issue being abortion, the issue was spousal abuse or sex trafficking. Yeah. What if instead of the Democratic Party being the party of abortion, they were the party of sex trafficking? Yeah. And the Republican Party, with all of its same flaws that we can have debates over, was the party of anti-sex trafficking. Both parties have flaws. One party is flawed beyond all belief. One party is so flawed that it becomes a moral wrong to vote for that party, because in so doing, you are empowering their political grab for power to protect the very injustice in question, namely the trafficking of children. So if the unborn child is equally valuable, then how can you lend support to that party? Yeah. So secondly, pastors have to get bold. It's time for pastors to get into the pulpit and stop being silent about the abortion of the lambs and start decrying abortion, start articulating an ethic of life, start getting their people on the sidewalks outside of abortion clinics with signs that say, "We will adopt your child." Does that mean that you have to do that to be pro-life? No, because that's like saying you can't oppose me beating my wife unless you're willing to marry her. We don't have to adopt personal responsibility to adopt children to be truly pro-life. We don't. All that is required to be pro-life is to speak and live as if abortion is wrong. But as Christians in our individual lives, we do have responsibilities that are more broader and inclusive than the pro-life movement's objectives are. Yeah. And those should include a care for widows and orphans. If we're supposed to care for the orphan because he is endangered because his parents are dead, how much more should we care about unborn children whose life is endangered because his parents want him dead? Yeah. If the church cares about evangelism and reaching the lost, who is more lost than a woman entering a hitman facility who has reached such a low point in her life that she thinks she needs to pay a hitman to kill her child? Yeah. Whose heart is more ripe for the gospel than a man and a woman who now think that empowerment means paying someone to kill their child? These people are ready to hear the gospel. Right. So from a purely utilitarian perspective, abandoning any care about the unborn child, the church should be outside of abortion clinics just for growing the church and getting new converts. And then you add in the value of the child who's an image bearer of God and a neighbor, the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor. We now have the opportunity, if we merely put our people outside of abortion clinics every day that they perform abortions across all 50 states, we could bankrupt the abortion industry in a matter of months or years. Guys, studies from pro-life organizations have showed that upwards of 80% of women who are going to their abortion appointment will drive away and not enter the parking lot if there are just pro-lifers standing outside, just standing outside, not holding signs saying we'll adopt your baby, not holding signs of little pictures of 8-week babies in the womb, just standing there. What does that tell us? It tells us that God's rain falls on the just and the unjust, and eternity is written on the heart of man. And so even a woman who is contemplating the death of her child has enough of a functioning moral compass in that still small voice that she might feel shame by being seen by others entering an abortion facility. Okay, so take those 80% of women who don't go into the abortion clinic if there are just men and women standing outside of those clinics. Now, take every church, take 2 churches in every county in all 50 states, and get 5 people from both of those 2 churches. So 10 people from churches in every county in America who commit to standing outside of abortion clinics every day that they perform abortions. With signs saying, "We will adopt your baby. We have a back house for you. We'll pay for the delivery. We'll pay for your groceries." Yeah. Can you
That would change
imagine
everything. It would change
difference
everything.
that would make? It would bankrupt the abortion industry, and we as the church would be responsible. We could have the blessing and the joy of saving millions of babies, and then getting those people in our churches to meet Jesus, and then baptize their children, or I'm sorry, if you're a Catholic, or commit them to Jesus at their church by the very people who helped save that child. Think what that would do to American evangelicalism. Think what that would do to saving souls and saving babies, but the church doesn't do it because it's just too difficult.
You know,
so that would be that was long-winded, but that's what I would
that's great
to think about, that we can do this. Like, we can actually save souls and save lives by adopting a certain level of personal responsibility, just like the Good Samaritan did when he walked by a bleeding victim on the side of the road who needed help. The unborn is our bleeding victim. And how many pastors drive by the local abortion clinic on their way to church office to plan their sermon on Sunday? We are driving by bleeding victims that we could save if we would merely intervene. And of course, give to local pro-life organizations, equip yourself to defend life, but adopt personal responsibility.
I think that's huge. And I think that's been one of the problems of the church is we've just been so silent on it, right? And like C.S. Lewis said, right, for evil to triumph, it just takes good men doing nothing. And that's where we're at, is we all, well, I'd hope most Christians would say, yes, pro-choice is terrible, pro-abortion is disgusting. We've got to be for life. But we've bought the lie that, well, don't rock the boat. Like, don't say what you think. Oh my gosh, because we're supposed to love all people. Well, you can love people and you can stand for truth at the same time. And we have a heritage as Christians of doing these very types of things that you're talking about, Seth. In the early church,
the early church.
Yeah, they dump their babies at the dump. The Romans would leave baby girls at the dump, and the church would go and adopt them. And
the early church was culturally diverse because they were literally saving infants that were abandoned of different ethnicities. That is the heritage of the early church. That is how pro-life the church used to be. And now we think we're a pro-life church because you invited Seth Gruber to come give a pro-life talk on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday once every Sunday. Now, thank you. I mean, I'll take the honorarium. I need to support my family to do this. But it's a tragedy that I have to be booked 5 Sundays straight every January because it's Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. And me as a pastor, I can't do this. So I have to have a pro-lifer do it. Again, this is my passion. I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I'd rather be struggling to find churches to speak in because the pastors would be so regularly preaching on abortion and owning their responsibility to save preborn children that their congregants wouldn't need to hear a pro-life speaker.
That's right. No, I totally agree with that. And I think that there's fear, and I think that there's too much concern over tax-exempt status, and that's all crap. Like, we need to stand up for truth, and we need to stand up for life. And I don't want to be standing before Jesus and be held accountable as somebody who was, a proponent in the Holocaust or of Nazi Germany or in the pro-abort life of America, where millions of kids are killed behind the scenes. So it's out of sight, out of mind. We can't. We need to stand for injustice, especially when it's in the lives of the innocents. So, man, this has been awesome. We really appreciate your time and all of your wisdom on this. Where can people follow you if they want to learn more about what you're doing and get more into your ministry?
Yeah, thank you. I'm most active on Facebook, so you can follow me at Seth Gruber. We have a growing community there. I post a lot of regular daily content. I have a podcast episode every Monday on Unaborted with Seth Gruber. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you like to watch it, it's also available on YouTube, and you can actually watch the whole show. I splice that up into tons of bite-sized content every week on Facebook with addressing specific, sort of topics and conversations. So those are reshareable. They're very clickbaity. They'll equip you with little bite-sized pro-life munchies. So that's available. So subscribe to Unaborted. I have a website, SethGruber.com. You can ask me questions. You can do booking requests there if you want. You can also subscribe to my newsletter to get pro-life resources there as well. And then if you want to support my ministry as one of the only pro-life organizations whose entire mission is to go speak to young people to equip them to defend life and so that they will be the pro-life generation, then of course, any monthly partnership is appreciated as I commit my life to do this full time. So that's how you can connect with me. And my goal is just to equip you to defend life. We have 6 62 episodes now on Unaborted with Seth Gruber. Any pro-life argument, pro-choice argument you've heard, I've basically covered on there at this point. Or if I haven't, I will in the future. The one from 2 weeks ago was called "These Are the Best Pro-Choice Arguments. We Will Destroy Them," and I addressed the most two persuasive arguments. They're not very persuasive because it's very difficult to defend the indefensible, but they're heralded as the two most persuasive pro-abortion arguments, and I just laid those to the bigoted waste that they are. So if you have the time and you just like are a podcast guru, if you listen to my podcast, you will literally leave as a pro-life apologist. So anyways, that's how you can connect with me, and thank you guys for having me on. Thanks for what you're doing, and it's good to be in the battle with you.
Absolutely,
yeah,
bro.
thank you so much.
One of the things too I just wanted to say that I appreciate about you is that you don't pull punches and you don't try to be you're not mean and you're not unloving, but you're gonna say things the way that they need to be said, and you're not afraid to ruffle feathers, which I like, because honestly, if this is a life or death issue, which it totally is, and if it's complete injustice and if it's anti-God, we need to say things like they are, like your podcast. Kamala Harris hates babies. It's just true based on facts of how she's voted. It's true. So I appreciate that you don't try to be the guy who doesn't rock the boat. We should rock the boat on things like this.
The pro-abortion movement and their political serviles, the Democratic Party, do need to be ruffled.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that, man. So, hey, thanks so much for being together with us today, Seth. We really appreciate what you're doing. Hey, listeners, go and check out what Seth is doing. Go subscribe to his podcast. Go to his website. Get him to come to your church. Get him to speak on a Sunday. It doesn't have to be in January because it's Sanctity of Life Sunday. That's right. Have him come out. Have him come speak.
And
to
as your
youth
guys'
group.
Churches are opening up, as your listeners' churches are opening up, depending on the situation they're in, I am currently booking my pro-life church tour called "I'm Alive," and it's all about equipping the church to love their unborn neighbors and stand for life. And the whole service is built around pro-life. And I'll preach from the Word of God. It will be a biblically sound sermon, but it will be equipping and it will be encouraging and it will be convicting. And then we have a follow-up forum after the service for the churches that want to do that, discussing on the ground local tactics on how to stand for life in your community, and providing organizational resources from friends of mine that mentor up local Christian pro-lifers to save babies and minister to women and children in their community. So if one of your listeners' churches wants to do that on a Wednesday evening or a Sunday evening in 2020 or 2021, it's called "I'm Alive Pro-Life Church Tour." And you can find out details about that on my website as well.
Bro, that is awesome. Are you willing to travel internationally? Because we have people in the UK that listen, and even in Canada. I travel nationally and internationally. Cool. Well, hey, go check out his stuff. Please subscribe to his podcast. Stay in tune with this conversation, because this isn't just a one-time issue. This is something, my wife and I, this is a big deal for us, and we support multiple pro-life institutions because we want to be making a difference in saving lives of human beings. And so we need to put skin in the game. We need to put time in. We need to utilize our talents and our treasures in order to save image bearers of God. So let's go out and let's make a difference with that. But thanks so much for being with us today on Christ Culture and Coffee, and we will catch you guys next week.
All right, thank you.